If it is your first time or it maybe is not your first time, we've been in a series in the Sermon on the Mount. We've been talking about living the kingdom way. And what that means is that we're living God's way. We're seeking out the fundamentals and the rudimentary things of what it means to live in God's kingdom. And we've been studying that all the way through Matthew chapter 5. And in the next couple weeks, we're going to deal with some other difficult and exciting topics. But today, we're going to focus in on the latter half of Matthew chapter 6, and just a small section. As we end this idea of the practices that we've been seeing Jesus talking about, the theme or the idea that we've been getting from this is don't do good to be seen as good. And I promise this is the last week I'm going to repeat this. Unless I feel like you guys didn't get it, then next week I'll repeat it again too. And typically, our human problem is that sometimes we try to do things to be seen a certain way. Well, here's why our bottom line this morning is so vitally important. Right? I'm just going to come out and tell it and say it to you because you need to know this. As a Jesus follower, as a disciple, as a Christian, you have to understand this concept. And it's a little bit like the other one I shared. What we do because of God should always be for God, right? Amen? Everybody agree with that? What we do because of God should always be for God. And sometimes we have this attitude or this mindset where it's like, well, I'm doing this because of an expectation, or I'm doing this because I've read it and I think it's what I should do, but I don't really know why I'm doing it. And so as we've been diving through these three different practices, right? We started in chapter 5, and we started talking about the consistency of the kingdom, 5:1 through 12. It's what is commonly known as the Beatitudes. And then we go down into the section where he begins to break apart the law. You shall not murder. You shall not adulterate. You shall not do this. You shall not do that. And he goes through these different laws, explaining to them that the law is not actually, the law is the ultimate problem, not the way God has designed you to live. And then we get into chapter 6, and he talks about these three things. In the last couple of weeks, we've talked about this idea of giving and praying. And today we're going to talk a little bit about fasting, because that's one we don't practice that we should talk about a little bit. But the other two are important because they have to do with who we are as people who have seen the goodness of God and want to replicate the goodness of God in the lives and to the people that we're surrounded with, mainly to the people we worship with, mainly to our brothers and sisters in Christ. The principle in giving is generosity. The principle in praying is communication and building a relationship with God, building your personal relationship with God. And then in fasting, we could say that it's more about getting the attention of God. But all these things have been used, right? And in reality, what these three things are, is this: an outward expression of an inward devotion to God. Why do I pray? Why do I give? Who am I really devoted to? Because in all of these passages, Jesus says essentially the same thing. When you're praying, don't pray to be seen by men. When you're giving, don't give to be seen by men. Don't do this to be seen by others, because it's not for them. You're not doing this because these people have done something to you. You're not doing this because of people. You're doing this because of what God has done in your life, because of what God has done to and for you. That's why we're doing it. Not to be seen by people, but human beings, we have this tendency to appeal to appearances, or to appeal to a status quo, or to be something that somebody wants to see. And Jesus is saying it's not about what people see. It's about what your Father in heaven sees in your inner room when you're praying. It's about what your Father sees when you don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That's what it's about. It's an outward expression of your devotion to God and who He is and what He's done for you. But again, we have this problem as human beings, and that is that sometimes we use our devotion to God to be seen by others. Like, look how good of a Christian I am, or look how righteous I am. So I'm going to do these things so people see it. It could be any number of things. Jesus just lists 3. That's all he lists. But there are a number of things we can do to get caught in this trap. And that's why our bottom line is so vitally important, because what we do because of God should always be for God. It doesn't matter what people see. And Jesus is trying to get them to wrap their minds around this concept. And as he moves out of these 3 practices, he gives us 3 vital illustrations. A lot of times we go, well, what place do these things have in the Gospel of Matthew, or even in the sermon? How do they fit here, and what's their purpose, and what's their point, and why should I pay attention to them? Because what we like to do is we like to go, well, let's break down this section because it holds this principle. But in reality, we should be looking at the narrative. What's the story? What are we looking at here? Where are we sitting? What are the circumstances that we're dealing with? But to know that, you have to read Matthew, and you have to understand what Matthew's point and purpose is. And that is to prove to a Jew that Jesus really is the Messiah, that he is the Christ, the Son of God, the King. So how does this all play in a role? And what is Jesus teaching in Galilee? Well, it's simply this, what we read in the Sermon on the Mount. And so we dive in. Matthew 6, 16 through 24. We're going to deal a little bit with this last practice, but there's not a lot there. So I decided, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the last practice, and we're going to talk about the illustrations that Jesus gives, because those are also important to enlightening us to the other 3 things that he talks about in the gospel. So here he starts with fasting. Whenever you fast, right? It's a religious practice. It's to get the attention of God. I've heard stories of people wanting or desiring something, and then fasting and praying and taking that time to devote themselves to God in order to get the attention of God, right? Whenever you fast, it's a righteous practice that they're doing, that they're practicing here. Do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do. You've seen this before. As the hypocrites, people who are pretenders, is essentially what the word hypocrite means. Pretenders. They pretend. They're not real. Don't put on a gloomy face as they do, for they neglect their appearance. Oops, hold on a second here. They neglect their appearance so that they may be noticed by men when they are fasting. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, again, I'll have to say this again, because you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the people who were living in this time period, and the amount of confusion and the amount of misunderstanding of these kinds of practices. They've been doing it their whole lives, but they've been doing it for the wrong reasons, because of what they saw in the religious teachers. And the religious teachers are doing this. Well, they have a handle on something. They know it better than I do. I should just do what they do, right? And here comes Jesus along the way. He says, no, don't do that. It's not for them. For they neglect their appearance so that they may be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. It's that they've received their praise and their power and their prominence in the moment that they showed themselves to the people that they were trying to demonstrate their righteousness to. They've received that, but they don't have that with God. They've received their reward full. But when you fast, it says this: anoint your head and wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men. In other words, clean yourself up. Don't make an appearance of what it is that you're trying to display. Clean yourself up. This is a private matter, not a public proclamation. It's just like your relationship with God. It's not a public matter. It's a private conversation. It's between you and your Father in heaven, and you build upon that by praying and by reading Scripture and by being consistent. It's private. It's not public. It's between you and God. This type of thing, it's not for everybody. It's for you and your Father. But your Father who sees in secret, again, you've seen this repeated phrase before, and your Father who is in secret and your Father who sees in secret what is done in secret will reward you. Maybe not instantaneously. See, this is the problem we have in American culture. Instant gratification. If you're hungry, what are you going to do when you get out of church? Right? You're probably going to go drive wherever you want to eat instantly. 15 minutes sitting at a table, 20 minutes, maybe 45 minutes if you don't beat the Baptist down the street, right? But here's the thing. We have a problem with instant gratification. We don't understand what it means to delay gratification. We're not talking about an instantaneous, as soon as I fast, as soon as I pray, as soon as I give, God's going to give me what I want. Because God doesn't always give us what we want. God gives us what we need. God doesn't look at us and say, well, you did that, so I'm going to give you this. I mean, imagine if you did that to your kids. Give them whatever they want, whenever they ask for it. Whatever they want, whenever they ask for it. What kind of people might they turn out to be? I mean, you think about that. The instant gratification is a problem. And what Jesus is pointing out here is it's not an instantaneous like those who have been doing it to be seen by men. It's coming, and it may be delayed to the end of your life, but if you do this for the Father and not for yourself, your reward in heaven is far greater than the praise that you receive from men for pretending to be something you're not. So when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, so you not be noticed by men. But by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And then he moves into these three illustrations, which a lot of times, here's how we'll take this section and we'll break it down. And we'll say, well, we're going to talk about the heart, and we'll just preach this section, and we don't even consider the context of what is actually here. Why in the world is Jesus telling us not to store treasures in heaven? Well, I would imagine it had to do something with the fact that he just talked about that when you practice righteousness, you don't do it to be seen by men. So where are you storing? What are you storing? And with whom are you storing what you value? It's essentially what Jesus is saying. Do not store for yourselves treasures, what you value, what's valuable to you, what means something to you, on earth or the land, where moth and rust destroy, where it is inevitably at some point going to be gone, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. There's the delayed gratification again. If I delay now, what do I have later? Is my reward greater later or now? In heaven, where neither moth or rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal, where you don't have to worry about the ever-perishing world destroying what you value, but if what you value is with your Father, how much more is it worth? How much more is it worth? If you could simply sit down and go, you know what, I don't need that right now. I'd rather my actions be seen by my Father than seen by my fellow man. I'd rather have a great personal relationship with God and be confident in what I'm doing and know where I'm going and know who I'm living with than to put on a great performance for the people I stand in front of on a weekly basis. They don't need to know what I do in private. It needs to be about me and the Father. For where your treasure is, listen to this. This is important. For where your treasure is, what you value is, what is most precious and most important to you, is there your heart will be also. There your heart will be with what you love. I mean, think about this. Think about anything you've ever loved in life. A hobby, spouse, whatever. Think about it. When you really love something and you're kind of obsessed with it, right? You're kind of ingrained in it. You're kind of just wrapped around it, and that's all you think about, and it consumes your mind. I mean, think about the things that stop you from doing whatever it is that you desire to do. I mean, think about it. What stops you? I mean, there is nothing in reality that would stop you other than maybe a step back to look at, maybe this isn't the most important thing in my life. What Jesus is saying, you store your treasures in heaven, tells you where you're at. If your heart is with God, you're going to want to live with God, and so you'll store the things that are most important in life with God. And that's simply it. Then he moves on to the second illustration. The eye is the lamp of the body. You never notice that Jesus focuses a lot on the eye? You go back up to chapter 5, and verse 38, where he talks about retaliation, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And then you go forward into chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, where he talks about the brother who has a speck in his eye, working with the brother who has a plank in his eye, trying to pull the speck out of his brother's eye. There's something about the perception of the eye, right? What I see causes me to act. And so he's saying the eye is the lamp of the body. What you see is going to cause you to react. So then if your eye is clear or pure or sincere could be the word there. Your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. Or if your eye is evil, that's the way I would like to look at it. Not bad, if your eye is evil. If you see something, you have this natural inclination to do something evil. Something to hurt your fellow man, something to hurt God, something that is self-centered. Essentially what we're seeing, if your eye is bad, it will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you, listen to this is tricky. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Does it overcome you? Does the evil inside of you overcome what you know you should do? He's illustrating something here. What do you want out of what you do? You ever think about the end goal of the things I mean, because we've all been in the place where, we're like, that sounds really cool, and you don't really think it through, and then you do it, and you're like, yeah, that was a really bad idea. Like my 2-year-old daughter does this on a daily basis. She'll climb up on something, crawl on something, swing on something, get really high, and then she'll look down and go, Dad, help me. But that's life, right? We act without thinking through the consequences. My mother pounded this into my head. She says, you have to think before you do. You have to think before you do. You have to think before you do. But no, I just wanted to do. I just wanted to go. Same thing I see in my 2-year-old. I just want to go. And I had to learn through my consequences that if I thought through what I was about to do, I was less likely to do it. And the same is true for good things you do. If you have a natural, you see a need, and you're like, yeah, I could fill that need. Yeah, I could take care of that. But then you go, Or you think through, like, what if I do this good thing? How will people see me? I mean, there's all sorts of ways to look at this. There's all sorts of ways. You act on what you see. Your eyes will cause you to act in a good or bad way. And then here's the last illustration, because it's very, very important. No one can serve two masters. I mean, Paul talks about this at the end of Romans chapter 6, where he says that when you were immersed into Christ, you chose your master, you proclaimed to the world who your master was. Why are you going back and allowing sin to become your master? Why then are you going back and allowing this thing that wasn't your master to begin with to become your master? No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, because you're think about the idea of devotion and service. And he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. In other words, he's giving you a choice. Choose. Choose. Choose who you're going to serve. Choose who your master's going to be. Choose what you're going to do from this point forward. You can't serve two, so choose. Choose one. Or maybe it's even more reflective than that. Maybe it's the fact that I have to think about who am I serving. And maybe it's not even that I'm serving wealth or money or whatever. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's that I'm serving myself before I serve God. And I can't serve myself and serve God. So I have to choose. I'm at this divide. Jesus is giving an illustration. You're going to serve men, you're going to serve God. You're going to serve the teachings of the Pharisaical teachers and act like them and be like them. Or are you going to serve God who asked you simply to just go in your inner room. Keep your works of righteousness away from the public eye and allow yourself to build a relationship with God and do good because God has been good to you. So the takeaway this morning really isn't that much of a takeaway. In fact, it's a question. Because what I want us to do with this lesson in mind, what I want us to do when we're reading the text of Matthew, if you go home today and you start reading the Sermon on the Mount, you start studying, you start trying to digest what's in there, you have to think about this question. And it's simply this: what has your heart? Not who, what. Because it's more of a what question than a who question. More of a what question in the sense that, what has my heart? What's taking my attention? What's pulling me away from God? What direction am I really moving in? Where are my priorities? What has my heart? Because we can all answer the question of who has my heart. And I know what the stock answer is, well, God has it. But have you really sat back on and reflected on who has my heart and what has my heart? Right? And this is something that we need to grasp. What has my heart? What's the most important thing in my life? Well, I have a lot of important things. I got my family, I got my wife, this is just me, right? I got my God. And sometimes those three get mixed up because my family is important, my God is important. My wife is important. You mix those three things up and then you're like, wait a minute, I've been spending enough time building my relationship with God. I got to cut out time to build my relationship with God just for me, not for preaching, not for teaching, but just for me and God. Time that I can sit there and get to know Him and talk to Him and let Him know what's going on. Because what has your heart? What has your heart ultimately? I mean, if you think about the heart and what has your heart, it affects certain things. It doesn't just affect your consistency. It affects how you treat people. What has your heart affects how you treat other people in life, your spouse, your kids. If something is drawing you away to self-centeredness, if something is drawing you away to that other master that you shouldn't be serving, whether it's self or work or whatever. It affects how you treat people. It affects your motives. What has your heart affects your motives. What is my motivation? I mean, as we've been looking through the Gospel of Matthew, and we ask, what has the Pharisees' heart? Well, the praise of men has the heart of the Pharisees. The praise of men has the heart of who they're serving. They want to be seen a certain way by certain people. And so their motives are altered in their actions. And it also affects your conduct, your behavior. It affects your behavior. It affects how you treat people. It affects your motives. It affects your conduct. So if we sit back and when we really reflect on this question, and we really think about who and what has my heart, who is my master, where is my treasure? I mean, there's a lot of things to think about in this text. But we have to begin with self-reflection if we're going to make change in any part of our life. And as we've discussed before, change in the world doesn't begin with changing the world. It begins with a change in you. It begins with you deciding, this is the way that I'm going to live, and I'm going to live for God. And we'll pick it up right there next week. If you have a need of any kind, we offer an invitation. We here at the Pleasant View Church of Christ believe in baptism for the forgiveness of sin. And if that is the part of the journey that you're on in life, you can let us know and we will help you with that in whatever way we can. If you're just not there yet, or you're uncomfortable sitting on these front pews, I encourage you to tell someone. I encourage you to ask for help in a private manner, in whatever way you can. If you come forward now as we stand.